Agatha Christie, known as the Queen of Mystery. She wrote a book, And Then There Were None, previously published as 10 Little Indians. The official authorized edition, Agatha Christie. On the back there says, And Then There Were None, the world's best-selling mystery. 10. 10 strangers are lured to an isolated island mansion off the Devon coast by a mysterious UN Owen. 9. At dinner, a recorded message accuses each of them in turn of having a guilty secret, and by the end of the night, one of the guests is dead. Eight. Stranded by a violent storm and haunted by a nursery rhyme counting down one by one they begin to die. 7. Which among them is the killer, and will any of them survive? Read The Queen of Mysteries, personal favorites, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, Murder on the Orient Express, The Moving Finger, obviously, And Then There Were None, Towards Zero, Crooked House, A Murder is Announced, Ordeal by Innocence, Endless Night, Miss Marple, The Complete Short Stories, A Hercule Poirot Mystery, A Miss Marple Mystery. What Agatha Christie taught me was all about the delicate placement of the red herring. She was the ultimate genius behind the indirections. Shall we find the directions out? Elizabeth George, New York Times bestselling author of the Inspector Lynley novels. Agatha Christie is the most widely published author of all time, outsold only by the Bible and Shakespeare, also Don Quixote. Her books have sold more than 1 billion copies in English and another 1 billion in 100 foreign languages. She died in 1976. About the author. Agatha Christie is the most widely published author of all time in any language, outsold only by the Bible and Shakespeare. Her books have sold more than 1 billion copies in English and another 1 billion in 100 foreign languages. She is the author of 80 crime novels and short story collections, 19 plays, 2 memoirs, and 6 novels written under the name Mary Westmacott. She first tried her hand at detective fiction while working in a hospital dispensary during World War I, creating the now legendary Hercule Poirot with her debut novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. With The Murder in the Vicarage, published in 1930, she introduced another beloved sleuth, Miss Jane Marple. Additional series characters include the husband and wife crime-fighting team of Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, Private Investigator Parker Pyne, and Scotland Yard detectives Superintendent Battle and Inspector Japp. Many of Christie's novels and short stories were adapted into plays, films, and television series. The Mousetrap, her most famous play of all, opened in 1952 and is the longest-running play in history. Among her best-known film adaptations are Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile, with Albert Finney and Peter Ustinov playing Hercule Poirot, respectively. On the small screen, Poirot has been most memorably portrayed by David Suchet, and Miss Marple by Joan Hickson, and subsequently Geraldine McEwen and Julia Mackenzie. Christie was first married to Archibald Christie and then to archaeologist Sir Max Mallowan, whom she accompanied on expeditions to countries that would also serve as the setting for many of her novels. In 1971, she achieved one of Britain's highest honors when she was made a Dame of the British Empire. She died in 1976 at the age of 85. Her 120th anniversary was celebrated around the world in 2010. Agatha Christie, and then there were none. To Carol and Mary, or Carlo and Mary, this is their book, dedicated to them with much affection. Author's note: I had written this book because it was difficult to do that. The idea had fascinated me. I had written this book because it was so difficult to do that the idea had fascinated me. 10 people had to die without it becoming ridiculous, or the murderer being obvious. I wrote the book after a tremendous amount of planning, and I was pleased with what I had made of it. It was clear, straightforward, baffling, and yet had a perfectly reasonable explanation. In fact, it had to have an epilogue in order to explain it. It was well received and reviewed, but the person who was really pleased with it was myself. For I knew better than any critic how difficult it had been. Agatha Christie, from an autobiography. 10 little soldier boys went out to dine. One choked his little self, and then there were 9. 9 little soldier boys sat up very late. One overslept himself, and then there were 8. 8 little soldier boys traveling in Devon. One said he'd stay there, and then there were 7. 7 little soldier boys chopping up sticks. One chopped himself in halves, and then there were 6. 6 little soldier boys playing with a hive. A bumblebee stung one, and then there were 5. 5 little soldier boys going in for law. One got in chancery, and then there were 4. I actually don't get that joke. I feel like I've seen that word before, but I don't remember what chancery means. 4 little soldier boys going out to sea. A red herring swallowed one, and then there were 3. 3 little soldier boys walking in the zoo. A big bear hugged one, and then there were 2. 2 little soldier boys sitting in the sun. One got frizzled up, and then there was 1. 1 little soldier boy left all alone. He went and hanged himself, and then there were none. Frank Green, 1869. And then there were none. Chapter 1. In the corner of a first-class smoking carriage, Mr. Justice Wargrave, lately retired from the bench, puffed at a cigar and ran an interested eye through the political news in the Times. He laid the paper down and glanced out the window. They were running now through Somerset. He glanced at his watch. Another 2 hours to go. He went over in his mind all that had appeared in the papers about Soldier Island. There had been its original purchase by an American millionaire who was crazy about yachting, and an account of the luxurious modern house he had built on this little island off the Devon coast. The unfortunate fact that the new third wife of the American millionaire was a bad sailor had led to the subsequent putting up of the house and island for sale. Various glowing advertisements of it had appeared in the papers. Then came the first bald statement that it had been bought by a Mr. Owen. After that the rumors of the gossip writers had started, Soldier Island had really been bought by Miss Gabrielle Turle, the Hollywood film star. She wanted to spend some months there, free from all the publicity. Busy Bee had hinted delicately that it was to be an abode for royalty. Mr. Merriweather had had it whispered to him that it had been bought for a honeymoon. Young Lord L. had surrendered to Cupid at last. Jonas knew for a fact that it had been purchased by the Admiralty with a view to carrying out some very hush-hush experiments. Definitely, Soldier Island was news. From his pocket, Mr. Justice Wargrave drew out a letter. The handwriting was practically illegible, but words here and there stood out with unexpected clarity. Dearest Lawrence, such years since I had heard anything of you. Must come to Soldier Island, the most enchanting place. So much to talk over. Old days, communion with nature, bask in sunshine. 12.40 from Paddington. Meet you at Oakbridge. And his correspondent signed herself with a flourish, his ever Constance Colmington. Mr. Justice Wargrave cast back in his mind to remember when exactly he had last seen Lady Constance Colmington. It must be 8 years ago. She had then been going to Italy to bask in the sun and be at one with nature and the contadini? I don't know what that means. Later, he had heard I still want to look up what chancellery means. Everyone's, this isn't professional, Lunar. You're supposed to be reading, not looking up words. And I'm like, I can't be the only one who wants to know what this means. A court of equity, an office attached to an embassy or consulate. So that's a chancery. What was the other word? I already forgot what the word is. Contadini. I was skipping the intro because I was like, I want to be like just hop into the story, but at this point, might as well. Contadini is the Italian word for farmers or peasants, commonly known to describe agricultural laborers. It is also the name of a prominent family-owned farm in Puglia, Italy, specializing in hand-harvested artisanal jarred vegetables and sauces. Synonyms include peasants, laborers, and cultivate. To be at one with nature and the common man, I guess. Okay. I forget what I was doing. Oh, right. Might as well do my intro. Greetings, one and all, to the most cursed, most cringiest corner of the internet. A YouTube channel content creator actively alienating everyone in both the analog and digital world. Well, welcome and good evening, you wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8. Where was I? Later, he had heard she had proceeded to Syria, where she proposed to bask in a yet stronger sun and live at one with nature and the Bedouin. I assume it means the same thing, but I don't know. I don't know. Here lately, I'm trying to do a little side research on a few odd topics, namely Dead Sea Scrolls, Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Talmud, and basically the Catholic catechisms stuff. Let's see, the Bedouin are Arabic-speaking, traditionally nomadic pastoralists inhabiting Middle East and North African deserts. They are predominantly Sunni Muslim, known for a culture emphasizing hospitality, tribal loyalty, and honor. They speak Arabic and have historically lived in tents made of camel goat hair, though they now settled and live in modern housing. They are known for just being nomadic, but they've stopped being nomadic. But they're shepherds. Okay. Constance Colmington, he reflected to himself, was exactly the sort of woman who would buy an island and surround herself with mystery. Nodding his head in gentle approval of his logic, Mr. Justice Wargrave allowed his head to nod. He slept. Drank some 7-Up. Vera Claythorne, in a third-class carriage with 5 other travelers in it, leaned her head back and shut her eyes. How hot it was traveling by train today. It would be nice to get to the sea. Really a great piece of luck getting this job. When you wanted a holiday post, it nearly always meant looking after a swarm of children. Secretarial holidays posts were much more difficult to get. Even the agency hadn't held out much hope. And then the letter had come. I have received your name from the Skilled Women's Agency, together with the recommendation. With their recommendation, I understand they know you personally. I shall be glad to pay you the salary you ask, and shall expect you to take up your duties on August 8th. The train is the 12:40 from Paddington, and you will be met at Oak Bridge Station. I enclose 5... I assume that's a £1 note for expenses. Yours truly, Una Nancy Owen. And at the top was the stamped address. USA address or address. Soldier Island, Sticklehaven, Devon. Soldier Island. Why, there had been nothing else in the papers lately. All sorts of hints and interesting rumors, though probably they were mostly untrue, but the house had certainly been built by a millionaire and was said to be absolutely the last word in luxury. Vera Claythorne tired by a recent strenuous term at school, thought to herself, being a games mistress in a third-class school isn't much of a catch. If only I could get a job at some decent... I feel like I missed a page. Oh, school. There was a word I didn't see. And then, with a cold feeling round her heart, she thought, but I'm lucky to have even this. After all, people don't like a commoner's inquest. A coroner's inquest, even if the coroner did acquit me of all blame. He had even complimented her on her presence of mind and courage. She remembered for an inquest it couldn't have gone better. And Mrs. Hamilton had been kindness itself to her. Only Hugo. But she wouldn't think of Hugo. Suddenly, in spite of the heat in the carriage, she shivered and wished she wasn't going to the sea. A picture rose clearly before her mind. Cyril's head bobbing up and down, swimming to the rock, up and down, and herself swimming, and easy practiced strokes after him, cleaving her way through the water, but knowing only too surely that she wouldn't be in time. The sea, its depths, its deep, warm blue, mornings spent lying out on the sands. Hugo, who had said he loved her. She must not think of Hugo. She opened her eyes and frowned across at the man opposite her, a tall man with a brown face, light eyes set rather close together, and an arrogant, almost cruel mouth. She thought to herself, I bet he's been to some interesting parts of the world and seen some interesting things. Philip Lombard, summing up the girl opposite in a mere flash of his quick-moving eyes, thought to himself, quite attractive, a bit school mistressy, perhaps. A cool customer, he should imagine, and one who could hold her own. In love or war, he'd rather like to take her on. He frowned. No, cut out all that kind of stuff. This was business. He'd got to keep his mind on the job. What exactly was up? He wondered. That little man had been damned mysterious. Take it or leave it, Captain Lombard, he had said thoughtfully. 100 guineas, eh? He had said it in a casual way, as though 100 guineas was nothing to him. 100 guineas, when he was literally down to his last square meal. He had fancied, though, that the little man had not been deceived. That was the damnable part. You couldn't deceive men like that about money. They knew. He said in the same casual tone, and you can't give me any further information. Mr. Isaac Morris had shaken his little bald head very positively. No, Captain Lombard, the matter rests there. It is understood by my client that your reputation is that of a good man in a tight place. I am empowered to hand you 100 guineas, in return for which you will travel to Sticklehaven, Devon. The nearest station is Oakbridge. You will be met there and motored to Sticklehaven, where a motor launch will convey you to Soldier Island. There you will hold yourself at the disposal of my client. Lombard had said abruptly. For how long? Not longer than a week at most, fingering his small, do you guys say mustache or moustache? Captain Lombard, I just say mustache. Captain Lombard said, you understand I can't undertake anything illegal. He had darted a very sharp glance at the other as he had spoken. There had been a very faint smile on the lips of Mr. Morris as he answered gravely. If anything illegal is proposed, you will, of course, be at perfect liberty to withdraw. Damn, the smooth little brute. He had smiled. It was as though he knew very well that in Lombard's past actions legality had not always been a... I don't know how to say that. Sine qua non? Well, Google's open. Dear Google. Everyone's like, why are you typing slowly? I am holding things. I have one hand available. Latin phrase meaning without which not. Denoting an essential action, condition, or ingredient, represents an indispensable requirement or absolute prerequisite for something else to exist or occur. Common examples include truthfulness is a prerequisite for a free press. Oxygen, prerequisite for human life. Okay. Okay, so basically saying Lombard's past, legality had not always been a prerequisite. Lombard's own lips parted in a grin. By Jove, he'd sailed pretty near the wind once or twice, but he'd always got away with it. There wasn't much he drew the line at, really. No, there wasn't much he'd draw the line at. He fancied that he was going to enjoy himself at Soldier Island. In a non-smoking carriage, Miss Emily Brent sat very upright, as was her custom. She was 65, and she did not approve of lounging. Her father, a colonel of the old school, had been particular about deportment. The present generation was shamelessly lax, in their carriage and in every other way. Enveloped in an aura of righteousness and unyielding principles, Miss Brent sat in her crowded third-class carriage and triumphed over its discomfort and its heat. Everyone made such a fuss over things nowadays. They wanted injections before they had teeth pulled. Yes, if I ever have teeth extracted, I've always gotten, Novocaine and gas. Just Novocaine alone's not enough. Like, you need the injections and the gas. Like, I'm not having surgery without anesthetics. They took drugs if they couldn't sleep. They wanted easy chairs and cushions, and the girls allowed their figures to slop about anyhow and lay about half naked on the beaches in summer. Miss Brent's lips set closely. She would like to make an example of certain people. Oh, you don't sound very nice, Miss Brent. She remembered last year's summer holiday. This year, however, it would be quite different. Soldier Island. Mentally, she reread the letter which she had already read so many times. Dear Miss Brent, I do hope you remember me. We were together at Belhaven Guest House in August, some years ago, and we seem to have so much in common. I am starting a guest house of my own on an island off the coast of Devon. I think there is really an opening for a place where there is a good plain cooking and nice old-fashioned type of person. None of this nudity and gramophones half the night. I shall be very glad if you could see your way to spending your summer holiday on Soldier Island quite free as my guest. Would early in August suit you? Perhaps the 8th? Yours sincerely, Uno. What was that name? U-N-O. Oh, I see. It's U.N. And then you got O and a line, so the idea is that you can't read the rest of the O, like you can't read the signature. But it's not a long signature. It's not like it can't be that messily written. You can't read a 4-letter word. What was that name? The signature was rather difficult to read. Emily Brent thought impatiently. So many people write their signatures quite illegibly. She let her mind run back over the people at Belhaven. Had been there 2 summers running. There had been that nice middle-aged woman, Miss, now what was her name? Her father had been a canon. And there had been a Mrs. Orman? No, surely it was Oliver. Yes, Oliver. Of course. Oh, Soldier Island. There had been things in the paper about Soldier Island. Something about a film star, or was it an American millionaire? Of course, often those places went very cheap. Islands didn't suit everybody. They thought the idea was romantic, but when they came to live, they realized that the disadvantages and were only too glad to sell. Emily Brent thought to herself, I shall be getting a free holiday at any rate, with her income so much reduced. And so many dividends not being paid, that was indeed something to take into consideration. If only she could remember a little bit more about Mrs. or was it Miss Oliver? General MacArthur looked out of the carriage window. The train was just coming into Exeter, where he had to change. Damnable, these slow branch line trains. This place, Soldier Island, was really no distance at all as the crow flies. He hadn't got it clear who this fellow Owen was. A friend of Spoof Leggard's, apparently, and of Johnny Dyer's. 1 or 2 of your old cronies are coming. Would like to have a talk over old time. Well, he'd enjoy a chat about old times. He'd had a fancy lately that fellows were rather fighting shy of him, all owing to that damned rumor. By God, it was pretty hard, nearly 30 years ago now. Armitage had talked, he supposed. Damned young pup. What did he know about? Oh, well, no good brooding about these things. One fancied things sometimes. Fancied a fellow who was looking at you queerly. This Soldier Island, now, he'd be interested to see it. A lot of gossip flying about. Looked as though there might be something in the rumor that the Admiralty or the War Office or the Air Force had got hold of. Young Elmer Robson, the American millionaire, had actually built this place. Spent thousands on it, so it was said. Every mortal luxury. Exeter. And an hour to wait. And he didn't want to wait. He wanted to get on. Dr. Armstrong was driving his Morris across Salisbury Plain. He was very tired. Success had its penalties. There had been a time when he had sat in his consulting room in Harley Street, correctly apparelled, surrounded with the most up-to-date appliances and the most luxurious furnishings, and waited through the empty days for his venture to succeed or fail. Well, it had succeeded. He had been lucky and skillful, of course. He was a good man at his job. But that wasn't enough for success. You had to have luck as well, and he'd had it. An accurate diagnosis, a couple of grateful women patients, women with money and position, and word had got about. You ought to try Armstrong, quite a young man, but so clever. Pam had been to all sorts of people for years, and he had put his finger on the trouble at once. The ball had started rolling, and now Dr. Armstrong had definitely arrived. His days were full. He had little leisure, and so on this August morning he was glad that he was leaving London and going to be for some days on an island off the Devon coast. Not that it was exactly a holiday. The letter he had received had been rather vague in its terms, but there was nothing vague about the accompanying check. Why is it written that way? Why is it written Cheque instead of Check? A whacking fee. These Owens must be rolling in money. Some little difficulty, it seemed. A husband who was worried about his wife's health and wanted a report on it without her being alarmed. She wouldn't hear of seeing a doctor. Her nerves. Nerves! The doctor's eyebrows went up. These women and their nerves. Well, it was good for business, after all. Half the women who consulted him had nothing the matter with them but boredom. But they wouldn't thank you for telling them so, and one could usually find something. A slightly uncommon condition of the some long word, nothing at all serious, but it needs just putting right. A simple treatment. Well, medicine was mostly faith healing when it came to it, and he had a good manner. He could inspire hope and belief. Lucky that he had managed to pull himself together in time after the business 15 years ago. It had been a near thing that. He had been going places. The shock had pulled him together. He'd cut out drink altogether. By Jove, it had been a near thing, though. With a devastating ear-splitting blast on the horn, an enormous super sports Dalman car rushed past him at 80 miles an hour. Dr. Armstrong nearly went into the hedge. One of these young fools who tore around the country. He hated them. That had been a near shave, too. Damned young fool. Tony Marston, roaring down into Mary, thought to himself, the amount of cars crawling about the road is frightful. Always something blocking your way. And they will drive in the middle of the road. Pretty hopeless driving in England anyway. Not like France, where you really could let out. Should he stop here for a drink or push on? Heaps of time. Only another 100 miles and a bit to go. He'd have a gin and a ginger beer. Fizzing hot day. This island place ought to be rather good fun. If the weather lasted, who were these Owens, he wondered. Rich and stinking, probably. Badger was rather good at nosing people like that out. Of course he had to. Poor old chap with no money of his own. Hoped they'd do one well in drinks. Never knew with these fellows who'd make their money and weren't born into it. Who'd made their money and weren't born to it. Pity that story about Gabrielle Tourle having bought Soldier Island wasn't true. He'd like to have been in with that film star crowd. Oh, well, he supposed there'd be a few girls there. Coming out of the hotel, he stretched himself, yawned, looked up at the blue sky, and climbed into the Dalman. Several young women looked at him admiringly. His 6 feet of well-proportioned body, his crisp air, tanned face, and intensely blue eyes. He let in the clutch with a roar and leapt up the narrow street. Old men and errand boys jumped for safety. The latter looked after the car admiringly. Anthony Marston proceeded on his triumphal progress. Mr. Blower was in the slow train from Plymouth. There was only one other person in his carriage, an elderly seafaring gentleman with a bleary eye. At the present moment he had dropped off to sleep. Mr. Blower was writing carefully in a little notebook. "That's the lot," he muttered to himself. "Emily Brent, Vera Claythorne, Dr. Armstrong, Anthony Marston, Old Justice Wargrave, Philip Lombard, General MacArthur, CMG, DSO, manservant and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Rogers. He closed the notebook and put it back in his pocket. He glanced over at the corner, and the slumbering man had one over the eight, diagnosed Mr. Bloor accurately. He went over things carefully and conscientiously in his mind. A job ought to be easy enough, he ruminated. Don't see how I can slip up on it. Hope I look all right. He stood up and scrutinized himself anxiously in the glass. The face reflected there was of a slightly military cast, with a mustache. There was very little expression in it. The eyes were gray and set rather close together. Might be a major's, said Mr. Bloor. No, I forgot. There's that old military gent. He'd spot me at once. South Africa, said Mr. Bloor. That's my line. None of these people have anything to do with South Africa, and I've just been reading that the travel folder, so I can talk about it all right. Fortunately, there were all sorts and types of colonials. As a man of means from South Africa, Mr. Bloor felt that he could enter into any society unchallenged. Soldier Island, he remembered Soldier Island as a boy. Smelly sort of rock covered with seagulls, stood about a mile from the coast. Funny idea to go and build a house on it, awful in bad weather, but millionaires were full of whims. The old man in the corner woke up and said, "You can't never tell at sea, never." Mr. Bloor said soothingly, "That's right, you can't." The old man hiccuped twice and said plaintively, "There's a squall coming." Mr. Bloor said, No, mate, it's a lovely day." The old man said angrily, "There's a squall ahead. I can smell it." "Maybe you're right," said Mr. Bloor pacifically. I can't pronounce that word. It's a form of pacifism. The train stopped at a station, and the old fellow rose unsteadily. "This where I get out." He fumbled with the window. Mr. Bloor helped him. The old man stood in the doorway. He raised a solemn hand and blinked his bleary eyes. "Watch and pray," he said. "Watch and pray. The day of judgment is at hand." He collapsed through the doorway onto the platform from a recumbent position. He looked up at Mr. Bloor and said with immense dignity, "I'm talking to you, young man. The day of judgment is very close at hand." Subsiding onto his seat, Mr. Bloor thought to himself, "He's nearer the day of judgment than I am." But there, as it happens, he was wrong.